75
He was
years?
74, so next year will be 50.
49 years married.
Okay, I just had to do a little housekeeping here. I'm one of these people that can't stop. You can take the woman out of the home, but, yeah, my mind doesn't work well unless I have things kind of organized in front of me. But I wanted to first say, I don't know if Dan is still, there he is back there. I walked in late because I was actually working on this message till 10:50, and I looked at my watch and like, ah! And I actually had planned to be here for the whole worship, but when I walked in the door, I was just hit with this sense of sweetness. And I just want to thank you and the whole team. It was a real blessing. It actually brought tears to my eyes. And I just wanted to say that. As soon as I walked in the door, I felt this real, just a sense of sweetness, and saw all those dancers up there, and it was a joy. So thank you for that. Okay, so I hope those of you that have come here to be like really uplifted by the sermon and like, whoa, let's just feel good, you probably should leave right now. I mean, I am going to do my best to give us hope, but as Michael said, I've been studying, well, actually, I've only started studying the subject of suffering. I actually wrote the foundations of this message a year ago, and this is why I can't speak every week. I wrote it about a year ago, then I got it out again, and now I've been working on it for 3 weeks, and I worked up till 10:50, as I said this morning. So, but let's, Tom already prayed, I appreciate that, but Lord, I do pray that you would direct my mind, direct my words, that what you want would be what gets across this morning. And we are starting a little bit later than we usually do for the sermon. It's about almost 12:20, but I think it's a very important subject. I call this Songs in the Night, Sanctifying Our Suffering. And it is from last week's portion, Parshat Va'era, and the key verse is the one that Michael read quickly, chapter 6, verse 9 of Exodus. So I'm just going to start Romans 8, 17 to 18, or 7, well, it's not the whole thing yet, but, and if children, he's speaking, understanding how Gentiles can come into this body. If children, then also heirs, heirs of God and joint heirs with Messiah. If indeed we suffer with him, so that we may also be glorified with him. So part of Israel's inheritance that faithful Gentiles get the opportunity to share in is the inheritance of suffering. The deliverance and final salvation that is intrinsic in Israel's covenant must be awaited with suffering, just like the Israelites in Egypt had to wait all that time for their deliverance. But, and here's the key point I hope I am able to make today, because I'm only a beginner in this and I'm only learning it, but the way that we suffer, the way we respond to adverse circumstances makes all the difference in the world. The way we suffer can be either redemptive or defeating. I just want to repeat that because it's something that's hard to get into our spirits, and you would think that by 71 I would have learned this, but I feel like I'm just beginning just to understand. The way we suffer can be either redemptive or defeating. So I'm just going to read that Exodus 6:9 once again. So Moses spoke thus to the children of Israel, but they did not heed Moses because of anguish of spirit and cruel bondage. Well, let's look a little bit more at what spoke thus, the context of what that is. And I'm, you know me, I'm all about context. If you study the scriptures, you have to read the context. We have a few scriptures, and I will just tell PowerPoint. I can't even see who's doing that back there right now, but Exodus 5:20 to 23. But I'm going to back that up to the end of chapter 4. Aaron speaks the words that Moses was given by God, he brings together the elders of Israel and he tells them that he had a word from the living God, and the people believed him. The elders of Israel believed him. When they heard that the Lord had visited the children of Israel and that he had looked on their affliction and he was going to take them out, they bowed their heads in worship. So the beginning of chapter 5, Moses and Aaron go into Pharaoh. They've got the word of the Lord. It is the word of the Lord. They're not mistaken about it. They deliver it to Pharaoh, let my people go. And Pharaoh says, okay, right? No. Okay, so Pharaoh says, you've got to be kidding. No straw for them. So toward the end of chapter 5, the elders of Israel, the officers that had access to Pharaoh, come in and said, what are you doing? You've made it impossible to make the bricks you want us to make. And he says, you go make them, no straw. So as they're coming out, as these elders of Israel are coming out, Moses and Aaron are waiting for them outside the door. And they come out by Moses and Aaron and they say to them, let the Lord look on you and judge, because you have made us abhorrent in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants, to put a sword in their hands to kill us. So Moses didn't answer them back, but he comes back to the Lord and he says, Lord, why have you brought on this trouble? Why have you sent me? For since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he's done more evil to this people. Neither have you delivered your people at all. So within this context, then it says in 6:1, the Lord said to Moses, now what did I tell you to put up there? 5:20 to 23. Well, I paraphrased that, I read some of it. So in 6:1, the Lord says to Moses, now you shall see what I shall do to Pharaoh. For with a strong hand he will let them go. And with a strong hand he will not only let them go, he will drive them out of his land. And then God spoke to Moses and said to him, God sits down, says, Moses, take a seat. I want to explain the context of what I'm doing here. So I'm going to summarize that for you. This is 6:2 to 8. He says, okay, Moses, 1, I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. 2, I established my covenant with them to give them the land in which they were sojourners. 3, I have taken note of the suffering and cruel bondage of their offspring, the people of Israel. 4, I have remembered my covenant, and it is time to act on fulfilling my covenant. You know, people all over the world, including most Jews, think of the Exodus story as being about slavery and freedom. Christians often think of it as merely a metaphor for going from the bondage of sin to freedom. But as we read here, the primary and most fundamental biblical understanding of this miraculous event is this: God has a plan for his creation that hinges on the covenant he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God has determined it is now time to activate the covenant plan by bringing the children of Jacob out of Egypt. Now they are the nation of Israel. And this means, bringing them out means overcoming the resistance of the strongest world power of the day and bringing the children of Jacob to Horeb, Sinai, where they will hear God's voice and receive God's words of instruction for their life as a nation. And then, of course, he'll bring them to the land. And while doing this, God decides to cause the greatest and possibly the most famous miracle ever that will become a continual memorial for the Jewish people for thousands of years up to our day today, namely the parting of the sea. So in this heart-to-heart with Moses, God declares, I will bring you out, I will rescue you, I will redeem you, I will take you as my people, I will give you the land as an inheritance. And then God seals this essentially by swearing on his name. So as we read in 6:9, it is very easy and natural to respond to the pain of suffering, especially long-term suffering like being slaves in Egypt for hundreds of years, in any number of ways. We human creatures are very vulnerable, and we are aware of our vulnerability. Sometimes we try to hide it, we try to put a wall up, but we are helpless before all the pain and dangers that could befall us or our loved ones. When we are in pain, it is very easy to fall into despondency and depression and anxiety, or worse, we could rage against those we see as the source of our suffering. The Israelites had been suffering under the yoke of slavery for several hundred years, as I said, and it's very easy to see why they had trouble believing that things would change. I mean, if you picture yourself in that situation, I'm sure you can feel what they were feeling. Yet, God is the one who carries the vision and brings the covenant to pass. It is God's hand that began it, and it is God's hand that will accomplish it. Nevertheless, he chooses to need us. He needs you to act your small part. God uses Moses and Aaron to bring his message to Pharaoh. He didn't just speak to Pharaoh in a dream. He didn't, although he can do that, and he has in a couple of cases, but normally he uses human beings to do his tasks. But when we feel the powers of this world pressing in against us in resistance, it's easy to doubt and get discouraged. In 6:9-12, Moses spoke thus to the children of Israel, but they did not heed Moses because of anguish of spirit and cruel bondage. But Moses also had trouble believing that there would be any change. So I want to look a little deeper at the reaction here. In the face of these astounding and far-reaching words of Moses that he speaks to them, they basically shrug. They say, whatever. And they continue making their bricks, going on in despair and detachment. The whole nation of Israel was depressed and despondent. One symptom of despondency or despair is detachment. When people think they are trapped with no way out, a common coping mechanism is to detach from reality and from one's emotions, and in simple terms, to not care. Like, okay, whatever. To live in a gray world with as little feeling as possible, with as little commitment as possible. This also breeds cynicism, sarcasm, anger, and chronic hopelessness. It can also breed hatred. It may stem from a feeling of utter powerlessness. Moses brings a message directly from the God of their fathers, but they just cannot hear it. And God understands this. They have suffered too many disappointments. This reminds me of the reaction of many to the Holocaust. I did a study many years ago here at this building on Edward Feld's book, The Spirit of Renewal. And he says, speaking communally for the people of Israel, he says, the pain we have suffered prevents us from believing in a beneficent Creator God who miraculously redeems us. The rent in the universe is too deep. The tragedy of existence too overwhelming for the goodness of God ever again to be clearly manifest to us. We are past waiting for intervention from outside, for a glorious endgame that will transform existence. Our disappointment will no longer bear such a leap of faith. If the God we wanted so much did not appear when our need was so desperate, what use would that God be to us now? To speak of God is to speak of hope, but the Holocaust is a black hole swallowing up all hope. I have said several times over the years, it is our challenge in Messianic Judaism to find faith in this black hole of utter despair. We may even need that kind of faith ourselves at some point. We want to give it to our people, but we also may need it ourselves. So Moses had two significant barriers facing him. He had the nation of Israel's despair and the inability to believe, but we see that he also had his own despair and sense of powerlessness and inability to believe that he would be effectual in anything. He says before the Lord, the children of Israel have not heeded me. How then shall Pharaoh heed me? Well, like Moses, we too see the pain and hopelessness all around us. We see the powerful bonds of slavery, enslaving our loved ones and our society at large. We may feel powerless, and indeed we pretty much are, in the face of the evils that threaten our world and our personal lives. We desire to lift and awaken the despairing, the lost, perhaps loved ones who are in pain and bondage. But even if we, like Moses, were armed with a direct word from the Lord, if that happened to me, I don't know if I'd know how to deliver it. I don't know if I would be confident that it would even do anything. And often things seem to get worse before they get better, like it did with the Israelites. What? No more straw? You've got to be kidding. So here's where we can look at the nature of suffering. Even when things seem hopeless, even if you don't believe the outcome is possible, even if you see repeated failure of your efforts and see all your shortcomings and you know you have neither the merit nor the power to accomplish anything, we must, in faith, still stand in obedience. Back to Ephesians 13 that we talked about at Hanukkah. Therefore take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to what? To stand. To stand. Not necessarily to fight, but to stand. To not collapse in despair. But how do we do this when faith seems utterly gone? What is faith? It's not easy to define. I would say it's not an emotional state of confidence in what you believe. That may be a result, but faith is much deeper than just that emotional state of confidence. That emotional state is not always there. How many of you know that? It's not intellectual certainty, though there are certainly intellectual things we can pursue that can support and strengthen our faith. But perhaps, as I've been thinking about this is provisional, but perhaps more than anything, faith is merely trusting in God's goodness, no matter what the circumstances. And I'm not saying, you can only say so much in one message. I'm not saying we should seek out suffering, no. I'm not saying that we can never protest or fight against evil regimes or anything like that. That could be another message, and Rabbi Michael has given messages about those in the scripture who have resisted the evil regimes. So I'm not talking about that realm. I'm just talking about our inner reactions to things right now. So don't take me wrong. But to be mature believers, we somehow have to learn this most difficult of lessons, actually. If we do not grasp for control, if we learn how to suffer wrongs rather than lash out, God will perform his will beyond and despite all of our weaknesses and mistakes. And even if we don't get to see the results, but we must learn, like Paul, to be satisfied with weakness, and often weakness may look like failure. This is, in fact, what we see in pretty much every narrative in the Bible. Now, I want to take a slight diversion that's certainly related to a Hebrew midrash that I studied a few years ago that really touched me and really meant a lot. It's in a midrash called Pesikta de Rav Kahana, and a large section of this midrash is commentary on the 7 Haftarot of consolation. Some of you may remember, but the 7 Haftarot of consolation are readings from the second half of Isaiah that we read in the period between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah. And it really describes Jewish eschatology in that section. So in the 17th chapter of this midrash, the rabbis are discussing Isaiah 49:14 to 51:3. But they focus on Isaiah 49, verses 1 to 14, which I think we'll probably have on the screen. It says, "Shout for joy, you heavens." And think about the Exodus story we just talked about. "Shout for joy, you heavens. Rejoice, you earth. Burst into song, you mountains. For the Lord comforts his people and will have compassion on his afflicted ones." But Zion said, "The Lord has forsaken me. The Lord has forgotten me." Zion could not believe it because of anguish of spirit and cruel bondage. In elaborating on this verse, Rav Yehuda, one of the rabbis in the Midrash, imagines that all Israel, as one man, comes before what they call the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, and says, "Ribon Haolam, Master of the universe, I recall all the great destructions in which I was broken and crushed among the kingdoms." Then later in the Midrash, Rav Yehuda, in putting forth the remedy for this, he pictures the people of Israel again before the Blessed One a second time. But this time they say, "I recall songs that I have sung to you in the night times," from Psalm 77. And they quote Psalm 77. Actually, the whole thing is worth reading, but I just have the first few verses. "In the day of my trouble, I sought the Lord. My hand was stretched out in the night without ceasing. My soul refused to be comforted. I remembered God, and I was troubled. I complained, and my spirit was overwhelmed. I call to remembrance my song in the night. I meditate with my heart, and my spirit makes diligent search. And we see the same theme in Job 35, 9-10. Because of the multitude of oppressions, they cry out. They cry out for help because of the arm of the mighty. But no one says, "Where is God my maker who gives songs in the night?" So at this point in the Midrash, the rabbis all join in the discussion and give their thoughts on why do we offer songs in the night? What are the songs in the night? What does that mean? So one of the techniques the rabbis use in these kind of midrashim is to compile many related scriptures together to express the truth that they want to bring out. So they compile a list of scriptures. And I'm not even citing all of them. But here are some of the examples cited about why to offer songs in the night. Exodus 12:29. At midnight, the Lord struck the firstborn of Egypt. So after years of toil, until the people completely lost heart, that blow meant their deliverance, struck at midnight. Exodus 12:42. Night is used twice. It is a night of solemn observance to the Lord for bringing them out of the land of Egypt. This is the night for all the children of Israel throughout their generations. Judges 7:9. I have to set it up a minute. This is the story of Gideon. And in his day, the Israelites were greatly oppressed by the Midianites and the Amalekites. And they cried out to Hashem, undeserving as they were. And interestingly, it's a very similar scenario to what we just see in Exodus. An angel of the Lord appears to Gideon and tells him God will deliver his people by his hand. So what does Gideon say? He says, "Pardon me, my Lord, but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all the wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." And he also says, he's not worthy, like Moses said, "Oh, pick somebody else, okay?" And Gideon has the same reaction. But God immediately says, "Go in this might of yours, and you shall save Israel from the hand of the Midianites." The story's long, but God reduces Gideon's forces to a handful of 300 men, as most of you know. And what it says is, that same night, the Lord said to Gideon, "Get up, go down against the camp, because I have delivered them into your hands." And so it happened. 2 Kings 20, Isaiah is prophesying to Hezekiah about the Lord's deliverance from Sennacherib, the king of Assyria. It says, "And it came to pass on a certain night that the angel of the Lord went out and killed in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000. Esther 6:1, I'm explaining it rather than reading it directly, but at night the king couldn't sleep, and they brought him the book of Annals by which the king is reminded about Mordecai saving him from the plotters. And this nighttime thing marks the beginning of their deliverance. So after the rabbis recite this list and more of all the nights in which the Lord has wrought our deliverance, they go back to Psalm 77, verse 7. Will the Lord abandon us forever? The same complaint in Isaiah 49. The Lord has abandoned me. They answer, heaven forbid, chas v'shalom. He has not abandoned us and will not abandon. And then they turn, of all books, to Lamentations 3:31-33. For the Lord will not cast off forever, though he causes grief, yet he will show compassion according to the multitude of his mercies. For he does not afflict willingly, nor grieve the children of men. But Zion said, the Lord has forsaken me, the Lord has forgotten me. But they did not heed Moses because of anguish of spirit. In distress and despondency, we have trouble. We can't really perceive or even believe God's mercy and grace. This is why we stir ourselves to remember the songs in the night, the victories God has given us in our darkest hours. Does God change? Because we're by the rivers of Babylon, has God forsaken us? When the battle looks darkest, do we give up? And I love quoting Winston Churchill sometimes. The Lord picked him for such a time as this in World War II. And he said, continuous effort, not strength or intelligence, is the key to unlocking our potential. And he also famously said, it is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly. And I'll add to that, looking to him, the author and finisher of our faith. But we must know the goal. Let's remember, our mission is not the transformation of Egypt. Our goal is freeing the captives. The external confusion and dissonance we cannot help but feel are merely the outworkings of a deeper sickness of the soul, a spiritual battle in high places. Today we face a secular world that thinks it's foolishness and escapism to look to, quote, pie in the sky solutions. Yet we also face many who, like the Israelites, are just too despondent to believe anything good can happen. Maybe they haven't heard that there's a good God out there. And from Feld, in that book on the Holocaust, he said, we are past waiting for intervention from outside, past waiting for a glorious end game that will transform existence. And there are a lot of people out there today, I think, that feel that way. Even without being in the incredible terror of the Holocaust, I think a lot of people feel that way. So what do we do? As I said at the beginning, the way we suffer, the way we respond to adverse circumstances makes all the difference. The way we suffer can be either redemptive or defeating. Redemptive or defeating for our own lives, but also for those around us. It actually changes the air. It changes the spiritual atmosphere. Now, as you may guess, or if you know me, I always speak on things that are either troubling me or that I'm going through. So I'm speaking on this because I've been suffering in my own little way, certainly nothing like the Holocaust. But does anybody out there feel that, understand that? Anybody out here have some suffering going on in their lives? I don't think it's a rare thing. I think even those that didn't raise their hand, you know, we all have pain in our lives. We all have loved ones that need help. We all have a lot of things going on. And that's why, well, I will say it's the Lord. I feel like the Lord has just undertaken to teach me what it means to be growing into maturity. You'd think I would have done it a long time ago. But maturity meaning finding the glory of God in the midst of our suffering. That's as well as I can define it right now. I'm going to continue studying this, but finding the glory of God in the midst of our suffering. My lifelong quest as a believer has been, how do we find faith while we stand at Auschwitz? And I set up a whole trip for our family to go to Auschwitz because I needed to stand there and understand, and I still didn't understand. It seems impossible. But I just want to say we had the amazing privilege, probably 20 or 30 years ago, it was a long time ago, at one of the Alliance conferences, where Richard Wurmbrand spoke to us. Perhaps some of you younger people don't know who Richard Wurmbrand was, but he was a Romanian Jew who was first persecuted by the Nazis as a Jew, came to know the Lord. It's not necessarily the right chronology, but he came to know the Lord and became, I think, a priest in one of the Eastern Orthodox sects or whatever. And then when the Nazis were defeated and the communists came in, he was persecuted as a Christian for his faith because he was a leader in the community. And he was put in prison for a very long time. I can't remember, it was something like 20 years or less, but I don't have that. I'm not a good numbers person. But it was a very long time in prison. And all I can say is I have kept, it just touched my spirit. When he spoke to us, I felt like I have never met a believer like this. There was something about him that was different. And I really think it was because he told us how he would be in this cell. He could barely move in it. It was like, I don't know, 4x4 or something like that. Couldn't lie down. And he said many days he would just be dancing to the Lord and just praising the Lord. And I'm thinking, that's impossible. That's impossible. I'm just going to die if I'm in that situation. But I will tell you, it stayed in my heart and in my mind. There is something there that is just different. I just totally remember it. So, and by the way, this doesn't mean we can't bring our desires and our hopes and our needs and everything to God. I mean, I have come to God with deep, deep weeping and persistence in these last several months and years. But if we don't get the answers we want right away, what do we do? So I brought a couple of suffering passages, and I'm almost done. Philippians 3:10, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings, being conformed to his death. Now, this isn't like the popular message. I mean, I'm not saying people don't preach it. It is read. People know it. But what does this really mean in our lives, you know? One thing that I'm starting to see, that as we bear the suffering that comes our way, and again, we're not supposed to go out and seek it. You know, it's not something that we need to seek. And we can certainly pray that God relieves us, relieves our family members. There's nothing at all wrong with that. He wants us to come to him. But as we bear the suffering God allows to come our way, somehow our fellowship with Yeshua deepens. And in some way we become more like him. And I think that's what I experienced when I heard Richard Wurmbrand speak. I don't know these things for sure, but it felt to me like he was more like Yeshua. He's very gentle, but very strong, you know, kind of both things at the same time. So in closing, I'm going to be closing. One or two more from Winston Churchill. He says, success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. And he also said, which may or may not apply to us, but it may, we are in the preliminary stages of one of the greatest battles in history. And then Romans 5:2-5, through whom also we have access by faith into this grace in which we stand, and rejoice in the hope of the glory of God. But not only that, but we also glory in tribulations, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance, and perseverance produces character, and character expands and strengthens hope. Now, hope does not disappoint, because the love of God has been poured out in our hearts by the Holy Spirit that was given to us. So if we walk in the power of the Spirit, suffering in fellowship with Yeshua, when it's called for, by bearing all things that God allows, yes, banging on the door of God, pleading for deliverance, pleading for our family members, but in the end, enduring what comes our way, knowing that the glory of God is present even here. We are in our little corner of the world, transforming the air around us, bringing redemptive grace to all those in our presence. And to close, one more from Churchill. Fear is a reaction. Courage is a decision. And I'm going to change that slightly. Fear and grasping something, anything for relief, is a reaction. Trusting in the Lord is a courageous decision. Let us support one another as we navigate these difficult times that we live in. And I'm going to repeat Romans 8 with the second part of it. If children, also heirs, heirs of God and joint heirs with Messiah, if indeed we suffer with him, so that we may also be glorified with him. For I consider the sufferings of this present time not worthy to be compared with the coming glory to be revealed to us. Amen.